What's up everybody, I'm Jesse Showalter, and in this episode I'm going to share with you the top 10 things you need to know to get started in Adobe XD right now. Let's jump in and start with the first thing you need to know in Adobe XD, that is Artboards. We have an artboard on our canvas right now, and it's sized at 1920 by 1080, and so you can see all the dimensions of our artboard right there. We can also change the resolution or the perspective of our artboard simply by toggling landscape or portrait. We can turn on responsive resize, which is a little bit of an advanced feature. We can change the scrolling pattern. We can also fill it with a different color if we want. And we can turn on a layout, either layout or a square grid, so that we can line things up. That's our artboard. If we want to create new artboards, we're going to press either A on our keyboard, or we're going to use the artboard tool on the left-hand tool panel. When we choose either one of those, either the artboard tool or by selecting A, we get the ability to either draw custom size artboards or select pre-made device sizes from the right-hand panel, like an iPhone Pro or maybe an iPad. Maybe we want another desktop website size, or maybe a watch size for our interface. Next up, we have masks and fills and images. You can see on my artboard, I have a little shopping cart design, and there's currently some squares that represent the images that will soon go in there, but they are represented by these wireframed gray boxes. I can change the fill of any shape element, whether it is a box here or a button that I've created out of a rounded rectangle, and I can change the fill by selecting the fill right here in the fill panel. Right now I have this nice blue, but I could change it to something else if I wanted to. I'm going to undo that change because I like that. I can also add borders to things by clicking on the border options, and we get size, dash, and gap options, as well as getting outline, stroke, round caps, and also round join options. You can turn off your border and turn on something like shadows, manipulate the different elements of the shadow, and you can even play with background blur or object blur. We not only can fill elements with colors, but we can also fill them with linear gradients or radial gradients as well. Simply by selecting one of those options, we get the multiple gradient slider, and we can choose the colors that go in there. We can also fill objects with images, and we can do that by finding an image we have on our computer and simply dragging it and hovering it over our shape and dropping it inside. What that's done is added the image, and it's actually masked the image for us. And so we can actually double click on the shape, and we can play with this object and actually mask it inside, moving it around. We can also add images loosely onto our canvas or onto our artboard simply by dragging them inside. And if you'd like to do it this way, you can grab both elements, the square and our board game. Let's make sure that our board game is somewhere near our square inside. We can grab both of them and we can say mask with the shape. Once we do that, we're getting the same controls, a masked image inside of a shape that we can control the bounding box and the image itself really easily. Let's talk next about components. Components allow us to create reusable design elements that we can change once and have those changes be reflected across 1, 10, or 100 artboards at the same time. So as our projects get bigger, we don't have to change the color of a button on 100 artboards, but instead we can do it in one place. Case in point, we have our button down here, and we like our button. It's the right color, size, and text inside that we want to use across our entire project. So we're going to press Command or Control K, depending on your operating system, to turn it into a component. You'll see that our component has become our master component, and you'll tell that because of the little diamond on the top left-hand edge. It's green and it's filled. If we wanted another instance or version of this component somewhere, we could hold down Option and drag it out, or we could flip over to our assets panel that we'll talk about more here in a second and drag another instance out. These are instances. If I make changes here, they will override the styles in the master component. You can tell this is an instance because it has this white diamond in the top left-hand edge of the component versus the master, which has a filled green diamond in the top left-hand edge. If I make changes to the master, for instance, I can change the color to be something like a pink. It's going to change everywhere across my entire design. If we don't know where our master component is because we're somewhere else in our design, we can right click and say edit the main component, and it will take us back to the master. And lastly, we can override certain styles in our components by selecting an instance of the component and then changing something from the design. This will not override the master. it will make just a slight change in that instance and that instance alone. So we can change something like the typography from a semi-bold to a bold, and that's not going to change anything anywhere. But if we were to change the size of the text from 23 to 33, that's going to change everywhere across the board in all of our project. The next thing we're going to talk about is not just components, but component states. Component states are a way for you to create one component that has multiple variations or states all locked within that single component. Instead of having one button that is filled and another component that is an outlined version, we can come up with multiple versions of the same button. So we have our button here, and it is a component, and we want to have multiple states here. You can see once I create a component, by pressing the plus button or pressing Command K, we're now told that this is the main component and it currently has a default state. The default state is this aesthetic and all of these details that we're looking at right now. The blue, it's filled in, that's the current state. But we might want to create another state, a new state. And this state might want to be an outlined version of our button. So with that selected, we might want to grab the shape and turn on a border, selecting that same blue color, and we might want to then turn off our fill and increase the border size. It's an internal or an inside border, just like that, and I think that works out fine for us. So now we have one button, one component that has a filled state and it has an outlined state. We can also create hover states if we'd like to, and they have baked in prototyping built right into them. So we can choose a hover state. What do we want to do with our hover state? Well, maybe we could simply take our fill and darken it and move our words over to one side for some reason, okay? And we can go back to our default state, and when we press play on our prototype, you can see when we hover over, it already has interaction, it already has that prototype baked right into it for us. And so we can create one button with multiple states, and then when we pull out a new version or a new instance of our button, we can choose which state we want selected or displayed in our project. So that's pretty cool. Now that we have all of our components and our component states, we might want to take a look at that asset panel that we've looked at briefly. Instead of being over here on our layers panel, we're going to open up the asset panel, and you can see that I have a few of the assets I've already created. For instance, my button that has all those great states inside of it, but we also have an X to close, and each one of these different line items that has a game inside of it, that's a component as well. What other types of assets can we have inside of our asset panel? Well, maybe we keep using this blue over and over, and maybe that would be a good color to keep in our color palettes or our asset panel. So we simply select the button and we can click plus on the colors, and that's going to add that exact shade of blue right over into that panel. We could probably do the same for our gray that we're using, and maybe our off black. That would be a good one to use as well. Now that we have colors added to our assets panel, why don't we add some typography as well so we stay consistent through our project? I can grab a piece of typography and come to character styles and press plus, and it's going to give me the details of that text right there. I can grab multiple at the same time if I want to and add all of them in at one time. And you can see every single piece of text that we select is going to get added to our character styles that we can use over and over. For instance, later on down the line, if I'm doing a new version of this and I've played with my title and I think maybe I made it a little too big, I can bring it right back into line with what it should have been by simply selecting the character style up top, and there it is. Identical, keeping that consistency through the project. We can also select elements on our screen and we can select the colors to change them, which is pretty cool. We also have the ability to change these color assets, and whenever we do by right-clicking and editing them, we change it. Any component that's using this color, you can see, is going to change as well. So everything's kind of cascading down using the colors as kind of a master element. The next thing you gotta know about inside of Adobe XD are repeat grids. It's a way for you to create multiple elements in a grid structure and be able to edit them on the fly without having to be tedious and edit every single one. You can see I have a new version of my artboard on my screen, and by selecting that element and pressing Command or Control R, I'm gonna take this item and immediately expose some vertical and horizontal drag bars. I'm gonna drag down and we get multiples of the same item. This is really cool, but why is it so cool? Because if I change something in one place, it's gonna change everywhere. For instance, if I think maybe the title and the actual VIN number or SKU number of my product is too close, I can move it to the right, and as I move it, it moves everywhere in each item in my repeat grid. Pretty cool, right? I can also grab my element, and I can grab multiple images that I might have inside of my Finder or my computer, and when I upload it into one spot inside of that repeat grid, it's gonna drop images everywhere. Once we select our repeat grid, you can see hovering over the gutters in between the elements will allow me to evenly space my elements apart from each other. So I can do negative spacing or positive spacing, or right there down at 0. And so everything is lined up perfectly. And this is a really, really great way to create grids quickly. If you're done working in your grid because you want to maybe be able to customize one thing here without customizing it everywhere, you can always right click on your grid and say ungroup the grid, and now these are all each individual elements that you can mess with. Let's talk about some basic prototyping inside of Adobe XD. Basic prototyping will allow you to connect all of your designs and make it feel like an actual application using basic transitions. You can see here on my canvas I have a new artboard that has a simplified view of my shopping cart with a checkout button. I want to be able to tap my checkout and actually navigate over to this more complex screen that has all the payment details inside of it. So I'm going to click over to my prototype tab, and I'm going to select the button, and it tells me I have a default state, and that's great. It has a hover that's already working here in my prototype. But I also want to add another prototype, not just a hover state for the button, but when I tap this button, I want to go somewhere else. So I'm going to grab the little plus and I'm going to drag it to the screen on the right and release. And now I have a new interaction, okay? So that interaction is going to be a tap interaction, or it could be a drag. You could use keys and the gamepad to do things, or you can use voice interactions. We're going to do a basic tap trigger for our interaction. And when we do that, we want to transition and we want to move over to this shopping cart screen. So we're going to choose shopping cart, and we can do a simple dissolve, or we could do slide left or right. Let's play with a simple dissolve and see what it looks like. We click on our button and it's just going to dissolve into that space. We can change that and maybe do something like a slide left if we want. And now we're sliding our entire prototype over to the left. These are basic transitions that you can use, and they have some easing options, like maybe we want a snap option, and maybe we want to be slower, like an entire second. So why don't we press that with a little bit of easing and a little bit of timing change, it changes the tone of your entire prototype. The next thing we want to talk about is Auto Animate inside of Adobe XD. Auto Animate will allow us to not just transition with dissolves or pushes or slides, but actually animate the elements on your screen, getting as close to using something like After Effects without actually having to use something like After Effects. You're going to get real motion, real animation with really good controls. So Auto Animate is a lot of fun to play with. Here's what we have on our screen right now. We have our checkout screen, and when we click on our button, it moves over, does this hard transition over to our payment details. When we click shopping cart, it goes back. But you can see we have this box here called Pay Details, and we want to make sure that this element slides in and out, and that our button is going to move, our boxes resize, the whole thing. It's going to be great. Some of the keys that you need to know about Auto Animate is making sure that your layers are named the exact same way and that they're positioned in your layer panel in a really, really similar way. And so we have our pay details with our button on top of it. So we're going to take our pay details and make sure that it's here and our button is on top of it. Then we're going to move it over to the left-hand side, and we're going to take the opacity of this down, and now it's on the screen and it's ready to be animated. Okay. We also have the exact same list here as we do over here. Everything is exactly the same. We're going to come back into prototype, select our button, select our tap trigger by selecting on the line just like that. And instead of transitioning, we want to auto animate over to shopping cart with a little bit of snap at 1 second. Then we're going to do the same thing with the transition that we had here, choosing our trigger from transition to auto animate, snap at 1 second, and we should then be able to press play and see things auto animate just like that. And things move back. So we're getting a basic hover with our button that we already established. We're getting basic auto animate. Things are actually scaling, like our lists are scaling. and our payment details are coming in. You can have all sorts of fun with Auto Animate, and it's such a cool thing to do. It really brings your prototypes to life. The next thing we're going to talk about in Adobe XD is plugins. Adobe XD has tons of great plugins that you can use to make your job as a designer so much easier. Simply by clicking on the plugin menu down below on the left-hand side, we now have access to lots of different plugins, and these are the ones that I've currently installed. If you want to install new plugins, you can hit the little plus icon on the top right-hand section. It's going to open up the Plugins Explorer, and we can see all the different plugins that are available to us. We can look at collections like maybe sketching plugins, or we can look at things like using Undraw to add illustrations. Maybe we want something that is good for, let's see, we'll browse the rest of them here. Maybe we want something for icons. I have icons for design installed. I have a calendar one installed. Maybe we want something like this wireframer to be installed. We simply just click on it. We can see all the details, ratings of it, everything in our plugin store. We press install and boom, it's going to install directly into Adobe XD. You can see it's spinning and now it's installed. So we can head back and look for wireframer in our plugins menu, and there it is. We're going to tap on plugin and we can get started. This plugin will allow us to add some cool wireframes directly into our project so we have something to go off. There are plugins to make mockups, plugins to make grids, plugins to make images and icons and to find avatars. There's plugins for everything you could possibly need, and if you can't find one, you can make your own plugins. I'll leave some information down in the description how you can sign up and become a plugin developer if that's your thing. The last thing we want to talk about in Adobe XD is sharing your project, handing it off to engineers, getting feedback from stakeholders, and maybe even doing a little user testing. You can do that inside of Adobe XD simply by going up and clicking on the Share tab. It's going to show us our design, and we have the entire flow that we've been working on, this animation back and forth, everything about it. We want to create a shareable link for people to play with and touch. So we can go ahead and create a new link, and we'll call this prototype, and we can select what type of permissions or functionality we want this share link to have. Is it for design review? Is it for development? Is it for presentation or user testing? Or do we want to customize? One of my favorites is actually the development handoff feature, and that's going to create the ability to export for web and have a handoff space for your engineering and development teams. And so we want to say, make sure that anyone with a link can view this. Maybe we only want invited people, or we want to make it password protected. We're just going to say anyone with the link, and we're going to go ahead and create that link inside of Adobe XD. All right, it's updated, and now we have our link. Let's go ahead and create one more before we get going. Let's create a new link, and we want to call this user test. And let's make this for user testing purposes, anyone with the link, and we will go ahead and create that link as well. All right, now that we have development selected, let's click the link and it's going to open it up in my browser, and I get to see exactly what my engineers will see, which is I can see my prototype. I can actually interact with it just like it is in my design file. If I click anywhere on the screen, it's going to blink blue and tell me what are my interactable areas, just like that. I can leave feedback. I can say something like this, looks cool, if I spell the word looks correctly. Okay, so I can leave some feedback. I can even pin something like, hey, I want to make a comment right here that says, this is a cool game. And now people can view my, my pins that I've made. I can also mention anybody that's invited to this on the team. From here, I can also look at the development environment. So I can hover over and view the specs of this design. And this is going to give me or my engineering team the ability to see the viewport size, all the colors. When I hover over any particular color, it shows me where in the design it's used. I can see all the colors or character styles and where they're used in the design. I can also come down and see the different interactions, right? The interactions that we have take place here on this screen. If I click on any one element, I get measurements in between it and surrounding elements. And because this one was outputted for web and not mobile, I'm going to get CSS, where on the other ones you might get Android or iOS code to implement for your engineering teams. After this, I can head over to the variables and I can see the different variables in code that it's created for me to implement into the project. And that's pretty much Adobe XD. Well, there you go. That's the top 10 things you need to know to get started with Adobe XD right now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell notification icon so you know when another video about Adobe XD comes out. If you have any questions, make sure to leave those down in the comment section and check the description for some helpful links about Adobe XD and UI design and anything else that I think might be helpful for you. I'm gonna put it down there. Also, if you want more content, behind the scenes footage, and access to not only this Adobe XD file, but any other design file I ever make on this channel, consider becoming a member and supporting the channel by hitting that little join button down below. Be a supporter or an insider. I'd really appreciate it, and I'm thankful for all of my supporters. I hope you guys are having an amazing week. I hope you're designing amazing things. I hope you're making amazing things, and I hope you're up and running and feeling really confident in Adobe XD. We'll see you in the next one.